The security camera footage froze at exactly 3:47 p.m., capturing the moment 67-year-old Thomas Whitehawk stopped struggling against the 18-foot Burmese python coiled around his legs. His weathered hands had gone limp, his eyes closed in what looked like peaceful surrender to death in the Florida swamplands. Then the impossible happened. A red wolf emerged from the cypress shadows, a species that shouldn't exist this far south, moving with purpose that defied every scientific study about wolf behavior. The animal locked eyes with the dying man for 3 heartbeats before launching herself at the massive serpent. Deputy Mike Harrison dropped his coffee mug when he first watched the footage, the ceramic shattering across the station floor. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, rewinding the video for the 5th time. "That wolf, she's protecting him." The timestamp showed 18 minutes of life-and-death combat that would shatter everything wildlife experts thought they knew about interspecies relationships. But the real mystery wasn't why a wild wolf saved a stranger's life. The question that would haunt investigators for months was simpler and infinitely more disturbing. How did Thomas Whitehawk know her name? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks before that fateful October afternoon, Thomas Whitehawk sat alone at his kitchen table in the pre-dawn darkness, counting pills with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned that survival came down to mathematics. Heart medication, 14 pills left, $28 in his checking account, prescription refill due in 5 days. The math never worked out in his favor anymore. At 67, Tom carried himself with the careful dignity of a man who'd worked with his hands for 4 decades, fixing engines and supporting a family on an auto mechanic's wages in Gainesville, Florida. His Cherokee heritage showed in his weathered features and the quiet way he moved through the world, speaking only when words mattered. The small cabin he'd shared with his wife, Sarah, for 38 years now felt cavernous without her laughter filling the empty spaces. Sarah had been gone 3 years, taken by cancer that devoured their savings faster than it devoured her body. And the medical bills had consumed their retirement fund, their modest investments, everything except the house itself. What the hospital couldn't take, Tom had given away. $300,000 in life insurance money donated to various wolf conservation groups across the southeastern United States. His daughter, Rebecca, hadn't spoken to him since the day she discovered those donation receipts. "Dad, that money was supposed to be our inheritance," she'd screamed over the phone. "You chose wolves over your own family." The accusation still echoed in his dreams, mixing with Sarah's final words. "Promise me the wolves won't be forgotten, Tom. Promise me you'll keep caring when everyone else stops." Now Tom survived on Social Security payments of $1,347 a month, selling handmade wooden birdhouses at the local farmers market to cover the gap between poverty and starvation. Every weekend he drove his battered pickup truck to the Everglades National Park, volunteering at the wildlife sanctuary and photographing birds for the memorial album he was creating in Sarah's honor. She'd always loved watching the great blue herons fish in the early morning light. The controversy surrounding Tom's wolf advocacy had made him something of a pariah in rural Florida, where ranchers and hunters viewed wolves as vermin to be eliminated. Local newspapers had run editorials questioning his sanity, and more than one neighbor had suggested he move somewhere his wolf obsession wouldn't endanger local livestock. Tom endured the criticism with stoic silence, the same way he'd endured everything else since Sarah's death. But late at night, when the loneliness pressed against his chest like a physical weight, Tom would read aloud from Sarah's diary to the empty room. Her words had become his prayer book, her wisdom his compass through grief. "Animals remember love longer than people do, Tom. They forgive faster, too. Maybe that's why God gave them to us, to teach us how to be better than we are." This Saturday morning, like every Saturday morning for the past 3 years, Tom loaded his camera equipment and drove toward the Everglades, carrying Sarah's ashes in a small pendant around his neck and hoped that today might hurt a little less than yesterday. The October sun hung low over the Everglades as Tom positioned himself at mile marker 23, the same weathered wooden post where he and Sarah had shared countless mornings watching wildlife emerge from the cypress shadows. Today marked exactly 3 years since her death, and he'd brought Sarah's old Nikon camera to photograph the great blue herons for her memorial album. The familiar weight of the camera felt like holding her hand again. Tom knelt beside the murky water's edge, adjusting the telephoto lens to capture a magnificent heron poised motionless among the cattails. Through the viewfinder, the bird's reflection created a perfect mirror image on the glassy surface, the kind of shot Sarah would have treasured. "Just like you always said, honey," he whispered to the pendant containing her ashes. "Beauty exists in the stillness between heartbeats." A sudden splash shattered the morning silence. The heron exploded into flight as something massive disturbed the water behind Tom. He turned, expecting to see an alligator surfacing for air, but instead found himself staring at the broad, triangular head of an 18-foot Burmese python emerging from the dark water like a prehistoric nightmare. Tom scrambled backward, his arthritic knees protesting as he tried to gain distance from the serpent. His boot caught on a submerged cypress root, sending him tumbling onto his back across a fallen log. The camera flew from his hands, Sarah's precious Nikon disappearing into the murky water with a sickening splash that echoed like a gunshot in his chest. The python moved with terrifying speed for something so massive, its muscular coils flowing across the muddy bank like liquid death. Tom felt the crushing weight as the snake's body wrapped around his legs, the pressure immediate and unforgiving. His heart medication bottle tumbled from his shirt pocket, pills scattering across the wet ground like tiny white promises of life he could no longer reach. "Not like this," Tom gasped, fighting against the constricting coils that were already cutting off circulation to his lower body. The python's head rose above him, flat obsidian eyes reflecting nothing but primal hunger. Tom had read enough about these invasive predators to know he had perhaps 6 minutes before the crushing pressure stopped his heart entirely. His phone, waterlogged and useless, displayed a battery warning of 3% before the screen went black. No signal anyway. Not this deep in the wilderness. Tom closed his eyes and felt the pendant containing Sarah's ashes press against his chest as the python tightened its grip. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 3 years wanting to join his wife, and now death was claiming him in the very place they'd found their deepest happiness together. "I kept my promise about the wolves, honey," he whispered to Sarah's memory as the snake's coils shifted higher around his torso. "I gave them everything we had." The words came easier now, almost peaceful. "I'm so tired of being alone." For the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, Tom felt something resembling relief. The constant ache of grief, the financial struggle, the crushing loneliness, all of it would end here beside the water where they'd shared so many perfect mornings. He could almost hear Sarah's voice calling him home, could almost see her standing in that golden light she'd always talked about finding on the other side. The python's pressure increased, and Tom's vision began to blur at the edges. His last coherent thought was a fragment of Sarah's favorite Bible verse, the one she'd whispered during her final moments. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." Perhaps his morning was finally about to begin. Then, cutting through his surrender like lightning through darkness, came a sound that changed everything. The defiant howl of a wolf challenging death itself. The howl pierced the morning air like a battle cry from another century, raw and primal and utterly fearless. Tom's eyes snapped open to see a red wolf emerge from the cypress shadows, her rust-colored coat gleaming in the filtered sunlight. She was smaller than the gray wolves of the northern territories, but her presence commanded the swampland with an authority that made even the massive python pause its deadly work. The wolf's amber eyes locked onto Tom's face for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity. In that gaze, Tom saw something that defied every scientific study he'd ever read about wild wolf behavior: recognition, concern, and an almost human intelligence that made his breath catch in his throat. A distinctive white marking across her chest formed the shape of a perfect heart, and her left ear bore an old scar from what looked like a metal trap. "Go away, girl," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible as the python's coils tightened around his ribs. "Save yourself and your babies." He could see she was pregnant, her belly visibly swollen with the precious burden of new life. The last thing he wanted was for his death to endanger an expectant mother and her unborn pups. But the wolf didn't retreat. Instead, she began circling the python and Tom with the calculated precision of a predator assessing her prey. Her movements were fluid and purposeful, each step placed with the confidence of an apex predator who had never learned to fear anything that walked, swam, or slithered through her domain. The python's flat head swiveled to track her movement, its primitive brain recognizing a new threat to its kill. Tom felt the crushing pressure ease slightly as the snake's attention divided between maintaining its death grip and defending against this unexpected challenger. The wolf stopped circling and lowered her head, lips pulling back to reveal ivory fangs that gleamed like daggers in the morning light. A low growl rumbled from her chest, the sound carrying a promise of violence that made Tom's hair stand on end. The python made its decision with the lightning speed that had made it the apex predator of the Everglades. Its massive head struck toward the wolf like a battering ram, jaws gaping wide enough to swallow a small deer. But the wolf was no longer where the strike landed. She flowed aside like liquid mercury, then darted in to sink her teeth into the python's neck just behind its skull. What followed was 8 minutes of the most savage, desperate combat Tom had ever witnessed. The python thrashed with prehistoric fury, its coils loosening around Tom as it tried to dislodge the wolf from its neck. She held on with the tenacity of her wild ancestors, her powerful jaws locked in a grip that would have crushed bones in any smaller prey. Tom gasped as circulation returned to his legs, but he couldn't simply escape and leave the wolf to fight alone. As the python's tail whipped toward the wolf's exposed flank, Tom lunged forward and grabbed the massive appendage with both hands. His arthritic fingers couldn't maintain a strong grip, but the distraction gave the wolf the split second she needed to readjust her hold and bite deeper. The battle turned into a deadly dance of predator and prey, with Tom and the wolf working in unconscious coordination. When the python tried to coil around the wolf, Tom would grab its tail and pull. When Tom's strength failed, the wolf would surge forward with renewed fury, driving her fangs deeper into the snake's vital areas. They fought as partners, two different species united by the simple primal need to survive. Finally, with a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire, the python's thrashing slowed and then stopped altogether. The wolf maintained her death grip for another full minute before slowly releasing her hold and stepping back, blood dripping from her muzzle. Tom rolled away from the massive corpse, his chest heaving as he struggled to process what had just happened. The wolf stood over the dead python for a moment, as if ensuring their enemy was truly defeated, then turned to look at Tom again. This time, something in her expression made him catch his breath. She approached him slowly, cautiously, and stopped just close enough to sniff his jacket. Her reaction was immediate and startling. Her ears perked forward, her tail began a tentative wag, and she tilted her head with an expression Tom could only describe as wonder. "You know me?" he whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Sweet Jesus, You actually know me, don't you? The wolf approached Tom with careful steps, her amber eyes never leaving his face. Blood seeped from a deep puncture wound on her left shoulder where the python's fangs had found their mark, but she seemed more concerned with studying Tom than tending to her injury. When she was close enough that he could feel her warm breath on his hands, she did something that made his heart skip. She gently nuzzled the pendant containing Sarah's ashes that hung around his neck. "Easy, girl," Tom whispered, his voice shaking with exhaustion and disbelief. "Let me take a look at that wound." He pulled off his flannel shirt, leaving him in just a thin undershirt, and began tearing the fabric into strips. The wolf stood perfectly still as he examined her shoulder, showing a level of trust that seemed impossible for a wild animal. The python's bite was deep but clean, missing any major arteries by mere inches. As Tom fashioned a makeshift bandage from his shirt, his mind raced back 15 years to another injured wolf in this same stretch of swampland. He'd been volunteering at the wildlife sanctuary then, newly married to Sarah and full of hope for their future together. They'd been trying for years to have children, and Sarah was finally pregnant with the son they planned to name David. The pregnancy had filled them both with such joy, such anticipation for the family they'd dreamed of building. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. He'd found a severely injured red wolf caught in an illegal steel trap, her leg nearly severed and infection setting in. She was pregnant too, heavy with pups and dying slowly in the merciless Florida heat. Tom had spent 3 weeks nursing her back to health in a makeshift pen behind their house, feeding her by hand and changing her bandages twice daily. Sarah had named the wolf Hope during those long weeks of recovery. "She's fighting so hard to live," Sarah had said, her own hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Just like our little David is fighting to be born healthy and strong." They'd both believed in miracles then. Both trusted that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. But life had taught them both cruel lessons about the fragility of hope. Sarah lost their baby in the 7th month, delivered stillborn after complications the doctors couldn't explain. 3 days later, Hope gave birth to a single pup in the pen behind their house, then died from internal injuries the trap had caused. Tom found himself caring for an orphaned wolf pup, while Sarah grieved their lost son in the bedroom they'd painted yellow for their unborn child. For 2 months, Tom had bottle-fed the pup and watched her grow strong and curious. She'd been fearless from the beginning, approaching Tom with the same trusting nature her mother had shown. But when wildlife officials discovered the illegal rehabilitation, they'd been forced to surrender the pup to a licensed facility. Tom had named her Luna before she left, after the moon-shaped white marking on her chest that seemed to glow in the darkness. Now, looking into this adult wolf's amber eyes, Tom felt his heart hammering against his ribs. The white marking was still there, larger now, but unmistakably the same heart-shaped pattern. The way she responded to his voice, the complete lack of fear in her approach. It was impossible. But somehow, this wolf remembered him from her earliest days of life. "Luna?" he whispered, hardly daring to speak the name aloud. The wolf's ears immediately perked forward, and her tail began wagging with unmistakable recognition. "My God, you are Hope's baby, aren't you?" The sound of approaching vehicles shattered the emotional reunion. Tom looked up to see a white pickup truck bouncing down the rough access road that led to the parking area near mile marker 23. The truck bore the logo of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and Tom's blood ran cold. If they found him with Luna, especially with her injured and clearly comfortable around humans, she could be taken away again, or worse, destroyed as a habituated animal deemed too dangerous to release. The truck stopped 50 yards away, and a man in his late 50s climbed out. He was tall and lean with graying hair, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. His uniform identified him as Dr. Vincent Carraway, a name Tom recognized from newspaper articles about predator control in the region. "Mr. Whitehawk!" Carraway called out, approaching with his hands visible and non-threatening. "I heard shots fired and came to investigate." "Are you injured?" His eyes took in Tom's torn clothing, the blood on his hands, and the massive python carcass, but seemed to avoid looking directly at Luna, who had positioned herself protectively between Tom and the approaching stranger. "No shots," Tom replied carefully, struggling to his feet with Luna pressed against his side. "Python attack. This wolf saved my life." He kept his voice steady, but his mind was racing. How had Carraway known his name? How had he known to come here at all? Carraway's expression darkened as he took a closer look at Luna. "That's a red wolf, Mr. Whitehawk. Highly endangered and extremely dangerous. She needs to be tranquilized and removed from this area immediately for the safety of local residents." He reached into his truck and pulled out a tranquilizer rifle, checking the dart chamber with practiced efficiency. "She's not dangerous," Tom protested, stepping in front of Luna despite his fear. "She just saved my life." "If you'd seen what I saw—" "What I see," Carraway interrupted, his voice hardening, "is a wild predator that's lost its natural fear of humans. That makes her a threat to every family in a 50-mile radius." He raised the tranquilizer gun, aiming it directly at Luna's chest. "Step aside, Mr. Whitehawk. This is for everyone's safety." Tom felt Luna tense behind him, her body coiling like a spring ready to launch. She could sense the threat in Carraway's posture, could smell the aggression rolling off him in waves. But instead of running or attacking, she did something that made Tom's throat tighten with emotion. She moved closer to him, pressing her uninjured side against his legs in a gesture of complete trust. "You'll have to go through me," Tom said quietly, his arms spread wide to shield Luna from the tranquilizer gun. "This wolf has more humanity in her than most people I've met. She chose to save a stranger's life when she could have walked away. That doesn't make her dangerous. It makes her remarkable." Carraway's finger tightened on the trigger, but something in Tom's stance gave him pause. "You don't understand the bigger picture here, old man. This wolf has killed before. Livestock, pets. There have been reports of attacks attributed to this particular animal for months." "Then show me the evidence," Tom challenged. "Because what I see is a pregnant mother who risked her life to save mine. If she's really the killer you claim she is, why didn't she just let the python finish the job and take an easy meal?" For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the swampland, the tranquilizer gun wavering between them. Luna remained perfectly still, her amber eyes fixed on Carraway with an intelligence that seemed almost human. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the Everglades, promising the afternoon storm that would wash away all traces of their encounter. Finally, Carraway lowered the weapon slightly. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this, Mr. Whitehawk. Take your camera and go home. Forget you ever saw this animal. If I find you interfering with wildlife management again, I'll have you arrested for obstruction of justice." Tom looked down at Luna, who was watching the exchange with an expression he could only describe as hopeful. In her eyes, he saw the same trust her mother had shown him 15 years ago, the same faith that love could triumph over fear. He thought of Sarah's words about animals remembering love longer than people, about forgiveness and second chances and the courage to stand up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. "No," he said simply. "I won't abandon her twice." The standoff stretched across the humid afternoon air like a taut wire ready to snap. Carraway's finger hovered over the tranquilizer gun's trigger, while Tom stood his ground, his weathered hands trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through his 67-year-old body. Luna remained pressed against his legs, her warmth a reminder of the life he was fighting to protect. "You're making a mistake that could cost human lives," Caraway said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This animal has been linked to livestock kills across 3 counties. We have photographic evidence, Mr. Whitehawk, fang marks that match this wolf's dental impressions exactly." Tom felt doubt creep into his resolve like cold water seeping through a crack. He looked down at Luna, studying her blood-stained muzzle and powerful jaw. Could this gentle creature that had saved his life really be responsible for the attacks Caraway described? The wolf gazed back at him with those impossibly expressive amber eyes, and he saw something that made his breath catch. She seemed to understand they were discussing her fate. "Show me the evidence," Tom demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "If you're so certain she's guilty, prove it." Caraway lowered the tranquilizer gun and pulled out a tablet from his truck, scrolling through digital files with practiced efficiency. 3 weeks ago, the Morrison Ranch lost 2 calves, clean kills, throats torn out with surgical precision. He turned the screen toward Tom, displaying gruesome photographs of mutilated livestock. 2 days later, the Patterson family's German Shepherd was found dead in their backyard, same signature wounds. Tom studied the images, his stomach churning at the savage efficiency of the kills. The bite patterns were indeed consistent with a large canine predator, and the timing aligned with Luna's presence in the area. But something nagged at him, a detail that didn't fit the narrative Caraway was constructing. "These kills are too clean," Tom observed, his years of studying wildlife photography giving him insight into predator behavior. "A hungry wolf would have consumed more of the carcass. These look almost ritualistic, like something was sending a message." Caraway's expression darkened. "Wolves don't need to be hungry to kill, Mr. Whitehawk. Sometimes they kill for the pure joy of it. It's their nature." His voice carried a bitter edge that spoke of personal experience with predator attacks. "I've seen what these animals are capable of when they lose their fear of humans." Before Tom could respond, Luna suddenly lifted her head and released a low, rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from the depths of her chest. Both men turned to follow her gaze and saw 3 more vehicles approaching down the access road, 2 sheriff's department cruisers and an animal control van. The cavalry had arrived, and Tom realized his time for debate had run out. "You called for backup," Tom said, not really a question, but a statement of defeat. The odds had just shifted dramatically against him, and Luna seemed to sense the change in dynamics. She pressed closer to his legs, her body trembling with tension as the vehicles surrounded their position. Sheriff's Deputy Mike Harrison emerged from the lead cruiser, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. Tom recognized him from the local coffee shop where retirees gathered each morning to solve the world's problems over bitter coffee and stale donuts. Harrison was a decent man, but he followed protocol with military precision. "Tom, I need you to step away from the animal," Harrison called out, his voice carrying the professional courtesy of someone who knew his target personally. "We've got tranquilizer equipment and a transport cage." "Nobody needs to get hurt here." "She's injured and pregnant, Mike," Tom replied, using the deputy's first name to establish personal connection. "If you tranquilize her in her condition, you could kill both her and her unborn pups. Is that the kind of man you want to be?" Harrison's resolve wavered visibly. He was a father of 3 daughters himself, and the appeal to his protective instincts hit home. "Tom, you know I don't want to hurt a pregnant animal, but if this wolf is responsible for the attacks Dr. Caraway described, if," Tom emphasized. "You said if, Mike. That means you're not certain either. Are you really willing to kill an innocent mother based on circumstantial evidence?" The tension reached a breaking point when Luna suddenly bolted, not away from the humans as everyone expected, but directly toward Dr. Caraway. The wildlife officer raised his tranquilizer gun instinctively, but Luna wasn't attacking. She was approaching him with the same submissive posture she'd shown Tom, her head lowered and tail tucked between her legs. "What the hell?" Caraway muttered, his finger frozen on the trigger as Luna sat down directly in front of him and exposed her throat in the universal canine gesture of surrender. "Why is she... What is she doing?" Tom watched in amazement as Luna whimpered softly, a sound so heartbreaking it seemed to cut through the afternoon air like a blade. The wolf was apologizing, he realized. Not for crimes she'd committed, but for whatever pain Caraway had suffered that made him hate her kind so deeply. "She knows you're hurt," Tom said quietly, the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place in his mind. Animals can sense emotional trauma. "She's trying to show you she's not a threat." Caraway's hands began to shake as he stared down at the wolf prostrated before him. "Get away from me," he whispered, then louder, his voice cracking with barely contained emotion. "Get away from me!" But Luna didn't move. She remained in her submissive position, her amber eyes fixed on his face with an expression of profound compassion. Deputy Harrison stepped forward cautiously, recognizing that the situation had shifted into territory his training hadn't prepared him for. "Vincent, what's going on here? Why is the wolf acting like this?" "Because she remembers," Tom said, his own voice thick with understanding. "Dr. Caraway, what really happened to make you hate wolves so much? This isn't about livestock kills or public safety. This is personal." Caraway's professional composure finally cracked completely. The tranquilizer gun slipped from his hands and clattered onto the muddy ground as tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks. "My daughter," he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "My little Emma. She was 8 years old, and she loved animals more than anything in the world." The revelation hung in the humid air like a thunderclap, changing everything Tom thought he understood about the confrontation. Luna remained motionless at Caraway's feet, as if she knew her life depended on letting this man's pain finally pour out into the light. "Emma wanted to be a veterinarian," Caraway continued, his voice barely audible. "She volunteered at the wildlife sanctuary every weekend, feeding orphaned animals and helping with rehabilitation. She had this gift with wild creatures. They trusted her instantly, just like this wolf trusts you." Tom felt his heart break for the man standing before him, understanding now why Caraway had been so determined to eliminate Luna. What happened to Emma, Vincent? The answer would shatter everything Tom believed about the wolf he'd risked his life to protect. "Emma died trying to save a wolf," Caraway whispered, his voice breaking on each word like glass shattering against stone. 10 years ago at the Cypress Grove Wildlife Sanctuary, she found a young wolf caught in an illegal steel trap, drowning in a flooded drainage ditch. The trap had been set by poachers targeting the sanctuary's rehabilitation animals. Tom felt the world tilt beneath his feet as the timeline crashed into his memory with devastating clarity. 10 years ago, the Cypress Grove Sanctuary. A young girl who'd tried to rescue a drowning wolf pup. His hands began to shake as he realized what Caraway was about to tell him. "Emma went into that water without hesitation," Caraway continued, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She was always fearless when it came to helping animals. The trap had been anchored to the bottom with heavy chains, and when she tried to free the wolf pup, her leg got tangled in the steel cable." Luna whimpered softly, still prostrated at Caraway's feet, as if she could sense the approaching tragedy in his words. Deputy Harrison stood frozen, his hand hovering near his radio, but unable to interrupt the raw confession pouring from the wildlife officer's lips. "By the time I found them both, Emma had been underwater for 6 minutes. I pulled her out, performed CPR for 45 minutes until the paramedics arrived, but..." Caraway's voice dissolved into sobs. My little girl died saving a wolf that didn't even belong to our species. She gave her life for an animal that would never understand the sacrifice she made. Tom's legs gave out beneath him, and he sank to his knees in the muddy ground beside Luna. The memory he'd suppressed for a decade came flooding back with merciless clarity. A young girl's blue face as he pulled her from the black water, her small hand still clutching the wolf pup she'd died trying to save. He'd been the sanctuary volunteer who'd found them, the one who'd performed CPR alongside Caraway, the one who'd held the grieving father as he screamed his daughter's name into the uncaring sky. "Vincent," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was there. I was the volunteer who found Emma in the water." The confession hung between them, like a bridge across 10 years of suppressed trauma. "I tried so hard to save her. We both did." Caraway's head snapped up, his tear-streaked face contorting with recognition and rage. "You," he breathed, the word carrying a decade of accumulated hatred. "You were supposed to be watching the rehabilitation area. You were supposed to keep the children safe." His hands clenched into fists as the suppressed memories crashed over him. "Where were you when my daughter needed protection?" "I was checking the perimeter fencing," Tom replied, his own tears beginning to fall. "The poachers had been cutting holes in the barriers to access the animals. I found 3 more traps that day, Vincent. Emma saved that wolf pup's life, but she also prevented other animals from suffering the same fate." "Don't you dare try to make her death meaningful," Caraway snarled, his grief transforming into fury. "She was 8 years old. She should have been playing with dolls, not dying for a wolf that would forget her existence within days." Luna slowly raised her head and looked directly into Caraway's eyes, her amber gaze holding an intelligence that seemed impossible for a wild animal. Then she did something that made both men's breath catch. She crawled forward on her belly and gently placed her injured paw on Caraway's boot, the same submissive gesture domestic dogs use to request forgiveness from their human companions. "She remembers," Tom said quietly, the truth hitting him like lightning. "Vincent, this is the wolf pup Emma died saving. Look at her left ear. That scar is from the steel trap. Look at the white marking on her chest. She's exactly the right age." Caraway stared down at Luna with dawning horror and recognition. The distinctive heart-shaped marking, the scarred ear, the unusual comfort around humans, all the pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. "No," he whispered. "No, that's impossible. The pup died too. I watched them bury her when the infection set in." "The sanctuary lied to you," Deputy Harrison said softly, finally understanding the full scope of the tragedy. "They sometimes do that with grieving families." "They didn't want you to know the animal lived when your daughter didn't." Luna pressed her head against Caraway's leg, her entire body language conveying an apology for a debt she could never repay. The wolf pup Emma had died saving was now a mother herself, carrying new life that existed only because of an 8-year-old girl's selfless courage. Caraway collapsed to his knees, his hands hovering over Luna's head but unable to make contact. "Emma," he sobbed, "my little Emma. What have I done? What have I become?" The weight of 10 years' worth of misdirected rage crashed down on all of them as thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall on the Everglades. The rain began as a gentle mist, but quickly intensified into a driving downpour that soaked through their clothes and turned the muddy ground into treacherous footing. Luna remained motionless at Caraway's feet, her amber eyes never leaving his face as he struggled with the devastating revelation that he'd spent 10 years hunting the very animal his daughter had died to save. "The livestock kills," Tom said suddenly, pieces of a darker puzzle clicking into place in his mind. Vincent, show me those photographs again. Something about them doesn't make sense. Caraway's hands shook as he retrieved the tablet, water droplets obscuring the screen as he scrolled through the crime scene images. Tom studied each photo with the methodical attention of a man who'd spent decades observing wildlife behavior, his trained eye catching details that others had missed. "Look at the bite patterns," Tom pointed out, his voice growing more urgent. "The spacing between the canine punctures is wrong for Luna. These marks were made by a larger animal, something with a wider jaw spread, and see here?" He indicated the throat wounds on the Morrison calves. "The angle of attack suggests the predator was taller than Luna, probably by several inches." Deputy Harrison leaned in to examine the evidence, his law enforcement training kicking in despite the emotional chaos surrounding them. "You're right," he said slowly. "These wounds are inconsistent with a red wolf attack. The bite radius is more consistent with a gray wolf or a large dog." "That's impossible," Caraway protested weakly, but doubt was already creeping into his voice. "There are no gray wolves in Florida. The only large canine predators in this region are red wolves and domestic dogs." Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through his clothes. "Vincent, who else knew about your investigation into Luna? Who else had access to these crime scene photos and the dental impressions you'd collected?" Before Caraway could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the storm. 2 more trucks were bouncing down the access road, their headlights cutting through the gray curtain of rain. Tom recognized the lead vehicle as belonging to the Everglades Animal Control Unit, but the second truck was unmarked, its tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. The unmarked truck stopped about 30 yards away, and 3 men emerged wearing hunting gear and carrying high-powered rifles. They moved with the practiced coordination of a military unit, spreading out to surround Tom, Luna, and the law enforcement officers. The lead man was tall and heavy-set, with a face that spoke of too many years spent outdoors and too many nights spent drinking away whatever demons haunted his sleep. "Dr. Caraway!" the man called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We heard you'd finally cornered the problem wolf. We're here to assist with the termination, as agreed." Tom's blood ran cold as he recognized the speaker. Jake Morrison, owner of the ranch where the calves had been killed. But more importantly, Morrison was known throughout the county as the leader of an illegal hunting outfit that specialized in eliminating problem predators for ranchers and property owners who didn't want to deal with government bureaucracy. "Jake, what are you doing here?" Caraway demanded, confusion clear in his voice. "I never authorized lethal force. This is a fish and wildlife operation." Morrison's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Come on, Doc. We both know you've wanted this wolf dead for months. Ever since you started your little crusade about livestock protection, we've been handling the dirty work you couldn't do officially." The pieces of the conspiracy fell into place with sickening clarity. Tom realized that Morrison and his crew had been using Caraway's legitimate investigation as cover for their own illegal hunting operation. They'd been killing livestock themselves, then blaming the attacks on Luna to justify eliminating the protected red wolf population that interfered with their business. "You son of a bitch," Tom snarled, stepping protectively in front of Luna despite the rifles aimed in his direction. "You've been framing her all along. You killed your own livestock to build a case against her." "Those calves were past their prime anyway," Morrison replied with callous indifference. "Insurance covered the loss, and now we get to eliminate a protected predator that's been preventing us from conducting legitimate predator control operations in this region. It's a win-win situation." Deputy Harrison reached for his service weapon, but Morrison's men were faster, their rifles swinging to target the deputy with military precision. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Deputy," Morrison warned. "This is private property, and we have every right to protect our livestock from predatory animals." "This is public parkland," Harrison protested, but his hand moved away from his holster. He was outgunned and outnumbered, with innocent civilians in the line of fire. Luna sensed the escalating danger and rose to her feet, positioning herself between Tom and the armed men with the protective instincts of a mother defending her young. Her hackles rose and a low growl rumbled from her chest, but she made no aggressive moves toward the hunters. Caraway stood slowly, his face pale with the realization of how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. "Jake, you used my daughter's death to justify this. You made me an accomplice to murder." "Your daughter died for a wolf, Doc," Morrison replied without sympathy. "Seems fitting that wolves should die for her." Consider it cosmic justice. The rain continued to fall harder, creating a gray curtain that limited visibility and turned the confrontation into something resembling a scene from a war movie. Tom could feel Luna trembling against his legs, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining her protective instincts in the face of clear and present danger. "Vincent," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying across the rain-soaked clearing. "Emma didn't die so that you could become the kind of man who enables murderers. She died because she believed every life had value, including Luna's." The truth of those words hit Caraway like a physical blow, and for the first time in 10 years, he began to see his daughter's death not as a senseless tragedy, but as the ultimate expression of the compassion and courage that had defined her short life. The standoff stretched across the rain-soaked clearing like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Morrison's men maintained their firing positions while Deputy Harrison calculated odds that grew worse with each passing second. Tom stood protectively over Luna, who remained pressed against his legs with the intelligence to understand that sudden movements could trigger violence. Then Caraway did something that surprised everyone. He stepped directly between Morrison's rifles and Luna, his arms spread wide in a gesture of protection that mirrored Tom's stance. "No," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd finally found his moral center. "Emma didn't die so I could become an accomplice to murder." Morrison's face darkened with rage. "Get out of the way, Doc. You've been hunting this wolf for months. Don't develop a conscience now." "I've been hunting a killer," Caraway replied, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "But the real killer is standing right here with a rifle in his hands." He turned to face Morrison directly, no longer the broken man who'd been manipulated by grief and rage. "How many livestock did you actually kill, Jake? How many innocent animals died to frame Luna for your crimes?" The question hung in the humid air like an accusation that demanded an answer. Morrison's men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. They'd signed up to eliminate a dangerous predator, not to participate in a conspiracy that was rapidly unraveling. "You're making a mistake, Caraway," Morrison warned, his finger moving to the trigger of his rifle. "This wolf killed your daughter. Don't let some old man's bleeding heart make you forget what she cost you." "Luna didn't kill Emma," Tom interjected, his voice carrying across the clearing with absolute certainty. "Emma died saving Luna's life. And right now, Emma would be ashamed of what you've all become in her name." The words hit Caraway like a physical blow, and for a moment his resolve wavered. But then Luna did something extraordinary. She slowly approached Morrison, her body language submissive and non-threatening, and sat down directly in front of his rifle. Her amber eyes looked up at him with the same expression of forgiveness she'd shown Caraway, as if she understood that hatred was a poison that killed the soul long before it destroyed the body. "What the hell is wrong with this animal?" one of Morrison's men muttered, clearly disturbed by Luna's behavior. "Why isn't she running?" "Because she's not the monster you've made her out to be," Tom replied. "She's a mother trying to protect her unborn children, just like Emma was trying to protect her when she died." Morrison's hands began to shake as he stared down at Luna's trusting face. For a brief moment, something human flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps even conscience. but years of hardening his heart against empathy had made him incapable of recognizing redemption when it sat at his feet. "I don't care what kind of sob story you're selling," Morrison snarled. "This ends now." He raised his rifle to his shoulder, aiming directly at Luna's head from point-blank range. The shot that followed echoed across the Everglades like thunder. But it wasn't Morrison's rifle that fired. Deputy Harrison had made his choice, his service weapon drawn and aimed with the precision of years of training. Morrison's rifle fell from his hands as he stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where Harrison's bullet had found its mark. "Florida law enforcement!" Harrison shouted, his weapon now trained on Morrison's remaining men. "Drop your weapons immediately." The conspiracy collapsed as quickly as it had been exposed. Morrison's men, realizing they were accomplices to fraud and attempted murder, threw down their rifles and raised their hands in surrender. Morrison himself sat in the muddy ground, his wounded shoulder bleeding, but his pride wounded more deeply than his flesh. "You have no idea what you've just done," Morrison gasped, his face pale with shock and pain. "That wolf population will explode without proper predator control. Your precious ecosystem will be overrun within 5 years. Then we'll deal with that problem when it becomes a real problem," Caraway replied firmly. "Not by manufacturing evidence and murdering innocent animals." He knelt beside Luna, who had remained motionless throughout the gunfire, her trust in human nature somehow unshaken despite everything she'd witnessed. As Harrison called for backup and medical assistance, Tom finally allowed himself to believe that Luna was truly safe. The rain was beginning to ease, and shafts of sunlight were breaking through the storm clouds like promises of better days ahead. But Luna's ordeal wasn't over yet. She was still bleeding from her python bite, and the stress of the confrontation was clearly taking its toll on her pregnancy. "We need to get her to a veterinarian," Tom said urgently, noticing that Luna's breathing had become labored. "The wound is infected, and she could go into premature labor from the trauma." Caraway nodded, his transformation from hunter to protector now complete. "I know a wildlife veterinarian about 20 minutes from here. Dr. Sarah Chen at the Everglades Wildlife Hospital. She specializes in red wolf rehabilitation." The irony wasn't lost on Tom that they were rushing to save Luna at a facility named after his beloved wife. As they carefully lifted the injured wolf into Caraway's truck, Tom whispered a silent prayer to Sarah's memory. "Help us save her, honey. Help us save Emma's wolf." The drive to the wildlife hospital passed in tense silence, broken only by Luna's occasional whimpers of pain. Tom sat in the back of the truck with her head resting on his lap, his weathered hands stroking her fur while he murmured words of comfort and encouragement. Caraway drove with the focused intensity of a man trying to atone for 10 years of misdirected hatred. Dr. Chen met them at the hospital entrance, her team already prepared for emergency surgery based on Caraway's radio call. As they wheeled Luna into the operating room, she looked back at Tom with eyes that seemed to convey both gratitude and a promise that their story wasn't finished yet. "She's strong," Dr. Chen assured them as the operating room doors closed. "Red wolves are incredibly resilient. If anyone can survive this, she can." Tom and Caraway sat in the waiting room like expectant fathers, their shared vigil marking the beginning of an unlikely friendship forged in crisis and tempered by truth. Outside, the storm had passed completely, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Tom of Sarah's favorite sunset over their old farmhouse. "Emma would have liked you," Caraway said quietly, breaking the long silence. "She always had a soft spot for stubborn old men who cared more about animals than their own safety." Tom smiled at the compliment, understanding it for the peace offering it was meant to be. "Sarah would have liked Emma, too. She always said children and animals understand love in its purest form, without all the complications adults create." 3 hours later, Dr. Chen emerged from surgery with news that brought tears to both men's eyes. Luna had survived the operation, the infection had been successfully treated, and her pregnancy remained viable. She would need several weeks of recovery, but both she and her unborn pups were expected to make full recoveries. "There's something else," Dr. Chen added with a smile. "The ultrasound revealed she's carrying 4 pups, not 3 as we initially estimated. It seems this little family is going to be larger than expected." As they were finally allowed to see Luna in recovery, Tom felt Sarah's presence beside him as strongly as if she were physically there. The wolf was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and strong, one paw protectively positioned over her swollen belly. In that moment, Tom understood that some stories don't end. They transform into new beginnings. "What happens now?" Caraway asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom reached out and gently touched Luna's ear, the same gesture he'd used to comfort her mother 15 years earlier. "Now we give her a chance to be the mother Emma died protecting," he replied. "We give her the life she was meant to have." Outside the recovery room window, the first stars were appearing in the clear Florida sky, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of wolves howling carried across the Everglades, a song of survival, hope, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living things in the great circle of life. 6 months had passed since that rain-soaked afternoon in the Everglades, and the morning sun streaming through the windows of Tom's expanded cabin felt like a blessing he'd never expected to receive. At 68, he'd learned that life's greatest gifts often arrive disguised as its darkest moments, wrapped in pain that only hindsight could transform into purpose. The viral video of Luna's rescue had changed everything. Security footage from a nearby trail camera had captured the entire python encounter, and when Deputy Harrison released it to the media with Tom's permission, it spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Within 48 hours, "Wolf Saves Dying Man in Florida Swamps" had garnered over 15 million views, transforming Tom from an isolated widower into an unlikely internet celebrity. The comments section beneath the video told its own story of healing and hope. "This reminded me that miracles still happen," wrote a woman from Oregon whose husband had recently passed from cancer. "Animals understand love better than most humans," posted a veteran from Texas who'd been struggling with PTSD. "I've been feeling hopeless since my wife died, but this story gave me faith again," shared a widower from Maine whose words brought tears to Tom's eyes every time he read them. More importantly, the viral fame had brought something Tom hadn't dared to hope for: financial security. Donations poured in from around the world, totaling over $2.3 million in the first month alone. The money allowed Tom to purchase the abandoned Morrison Ranch at auction, transforming it into Emma's Haven Wildlife Sanctuary, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to red wolf conservation and rehabilitation. But the greatest transformation had occurred in his relationship with his daughter, Rebecca. She'd seen the viral video while scrolling through Facebook during her lunch break in Chicago, recognizing her father's voice on the audio track before she even saw his face. That same evening, she'd called him for the first time in 3 years, tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to him recount the events that had nearly cost him his life. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she'd whispered across the phone line that connected them across 800 miles in 3 years of stubborn silence. "I didn't understand what the wolves meant to you and Mom. I thought you were just throwing our inheritance away on animals that didn't matter." "They matter because your mother believed they mattered," Tom had replied, his own voice thick with emotion. And she was right. Sometimes the things we save end up saving us in return. Now Rebecca visited every month, bringing her two teenage children to help with the sanctuary's educational programs. Watching his grandchildren bottle feed orphaned wolf pups had healed wounds in Tom's heart that he'd thought would never stop bleeding. His grandson Jake, named after his grandfather, showed the same natural affinity for animals that Emma Carraway had possessed, often spending entire afternoons sitting quietly with Luna and her four thriving pups. Luna herself had become the sanctuary's star attraction, though she remained wild at heart despite her comfort around humans. Tom visited her enclosure every morning, sharing his coffee and reading aloud from Sarah's diary, while Luna listened with the same attentive intelligence she'd shown that day in the swamps. Her four pups, Emma, Hope, Sarah, and David, were growing strong and healthy under their mother's watchful protection. Dr. Vincent Carraway had undergone his own transformation, trading his predator control position for a role as the sanctuary's head veterinarian. The change hadn't been easy. He'd struggled with depression and guilt for months after Morrison's arrest. But working alongside the wolves he'd once hunted had provided a path toward redemption he'd never imagined possible. "Emma would be proud of what we've built here," Carraway had said just last week as they watched Luna's pups play in their spacious enclosure. "She always believed that people and animals could live together in harmony. We're proving she was right." The sanctuary had become more than just a wildlife facility. It was a pilgrimage site for broken souls seeking healing. Visitors came from across the country to hear Tom tell the story of his rescue, many of them carrying their own burdens of grief, loneliness, and despair. The message was always the same: love multiplies when shared, and sometimes angels come with 4 legs and fur instead of wings. But perhaps the most unexpected blessing had arrived 3 months earlier in the form of Martha Crow Feather, a 58-year-old Cherokee wildlife photographer who'd come to document the sanctuary's work. What was supposed to be a 2-day assignment had stretched into a lifetime commitment when she and Tom discovered a connection that transcended their shared love of wildlife. Martha understood Tom's devotion to the wolves because she carried her own sacred obligations to the natural world. Her Cherokee heritage had taught her that all living things were connected in an intricate web of relationships that demanded respect and protection. When Tom proposed to her beside Luna's enclosure on a perfect autumn evening, with the wolf family howling their approval in the background, it felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with Sarah's dying wish. Their wedding ceremony had been held at the sanctuary, with Luna's family serving as the world's most unusual wedding party. Rebecca had walked her father down the aisle while his grandchildren scattered wildflower petals that Luna's pups tried unsuccessfully to catch. The Cherokee blessing Martha's grandfather performed spoke of love that endures beyond death, of spirits that return in new forms, and of the sacred duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The most miraculous news had come just last month when Martha, at 58, discovered she was pregnant, a late-life blessing that neither of them had dared to hope for. "Sarah's spirit lives on," Tom had whispered as they watched the ultrasound image of their unborn son, the child they planned to name Samuel in honor of the Cherokee word for peace. The sanctuary's success had rippled outward in ways Tom never could have anticipated. The educational programs reached over 50,000 school children each year, teaching a new generation about wildlife conservation and the importance of coexistence. The research facility had documented behavioral patterns in red wolves that were revolutionizing scientific understanding of their social structures and communication methods. Most importantly, the sanctuary had achieved its primary goal. There hadn't been a single wolf-human conflict in the region since its establishment. The combination of education, proper wildlife management, and economic incentives for local ranchers had created a model for conservation that was being replicated across the southeastern United States. But on quiet mornings like this one, when Tom sat beside Luna's enclosure with his coffee and Sarah's diary, The success metrics didn't matter as much as the simple miracle of connection. Luna would approach the fence and press her nose against the chain link, her amber eyes holding the same trust and affection she'd shown that day when she chose to save a dying stranger's life. "Thank you, girl," Tom whispered as he did every morning, his weathered hand reaching through the fence to touch her fur. "Thank you for showing me that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form and finds new ways to multiply." As the sun climbed higher over the sanctuary, painting the enclosures in golden light, Tom opened Sarah's diary to a passage he'd read countless times but never fully understood until now. Love isn't like a pie where giving away a slice makes your portion smaller. Love is like a candle lighting other candles. The more you share, the brighter the world becomes. Luna's howl echoed across the sanctuary as if in agreement, joined by the voices of her mate and children in a song that spoke of survival, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living things. It was the sound of hope made audible, of second chances embraced, and of angels with 4 legs teaching humans how to find their way home. At 68, Tom Whitehawk had learned that every ending was simply a new beginning in disguise, and every loss contained the seeds of unexpected grace. The python that had tried to crush his body had instead broken open his heart, allowing love to pour in from directions he'd never imagined possible. As Martha emerged from the clinic building with news of another successful wolf birth, her hand resting on her own growing belly, Tom understood that their story was far from over. It was simply entering its next beautiful chapter, with Luna's descendants and their own unborn son carrying forward the legacy of love that had transformed tragedy into triumph. The morning sun climbed higher over Emma's Haven, and somewhere in the distance, new wolves were learning to howl, a song that would echo across generations, reminding the world that love never truly dies. It just finds new voices to carry its message forward into an endless, hopeful tomorrow. Dear friends, this story of Tom and Luna reminds us that our darkest moments often hide our greatest blessings. At our age, we've all faced loss, loneliness, and the fear that our best days are behind us. But Tom's journey shows us that purpose and love can find us even when we've given up hope. Sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what truly matters, and sometimes those who save us come in the most unexpected forms. Like Tom, many of us have felt forgotten or invisible, but this story proves that one act of compassion can create ripples that touch countless lives. Have you ever experienced an unexpected blessing during your darkest hour? What animal or person appeared in your life just when you needed them most? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.